The garbage district of Station Omega 9 smelled like rotting food and old metal. It was the lowest level of the station, where the lights flickered and the air recyclers barely worked. Nobody important came here. Only the forgotten people lived in these dark corridors. Was one of those forgotten people. She was 12 years old, small for her age, with messy black hair that she cut herself using a broken piece of glass. Her clothes were too big for her body because she had found them in a trash pile. Her shoes had holes in them, but her eyes were bright and sharp, always watching, always looking for danger or opportunity. 3 years ago, her parents had died. They were cargo workers on the station, honest people who worked hard and loved their daughter. Then one day, a section of the station's hull broke open. The emergency doors closed too slowly. Her mother and father were pulled into the cold emptiness of space. After that, nobody wanted. The station had no system for orphans, no shelters, no help. She learned to survive on her own. She slept in ventilation shafts where the warm air flowed. She ate food that restaurants threw away. She learned which security guards were kind and which ones would hurt her for fun. Tonight, she was hunting for dinner in the trash compactor bay. The compactor machines were huge and dangerous. They crushed garbage into small cubes that would later be ejected into space. Had to be careful. One wrong step and she could fall into a machine. But the restaurants above often threw away perfectly good food. Sometimes she found bread that was only a little hard. Sometimes she found fruit with small bruises. Tonight, she had found half of a protein bar and a container of rice that someone had not finished. She was about to leave when she heard a sound. It was a small sound, like a wounded animal trying to breathe. Stopped moving. She listened carefully. The sound came from behind a pile of broken machinery in the corner of the bay. Knew she should leave. Strange sounds in the garbage district usually meant trouble. It could be a trap. It could be something dangerous. But something in that sound made her heart hurt. It sounded so weak, so scared, so alone. She walked toward the sound slowly. Behind the machinery, hidden in the shadows, she found them. Two small creatures lay curled together on the cold metal floor. They were about the size of large cats, but they were not cats. Their bodies were covered in scales that looked like liquid silver. They had long tails and small wings pressed tight against their sides. Their eyes, when they opened them to look at her, were the color of burning amber. Stopped breathing. She knew what these creatures were. Everyone on the station knew. For the past 2 days, every screen and speaker had been showing warnings. Security forces were searching for escaped specimens, dangerous alien creatures, high reward for information. These were younglings of the... There were dragons, not the dragons from old Earth stories, but real creatures that ruled the outer rim of the galaxy. They were the most powerful species known to exist. Their warships could destroy entire planets. Their armies had never lost a battle. They did not trade with humans. They did not speak to humans. They considered humans to be weak and unimportant. And here in front of were 2 of their children. The creatures looked terrible. Their silver scales were dull and scratched. She could see their ribs through their skin. Dried blood covered wounds on their legs and wings. One of them, the smaller one, was shaking badly. It looked like it might die soon. The larger one tried to growl but the sound that came out was weak and pitiful. It was trying to protect its sibling, but it had no strength left. Should have run away, she should have told security. The reward money could change her life. She could buy food. She could buy real clothes. She could maybe even buy passage to a better place. But when she looked at these creatures, she did not see monsters or money. She saw 2 hungry children, alone and scared, waiting to die. She knew that feeling too well. Slowly, very slowly, sat down on the floor. She was not close enough to touch them, but close enough to show she was not running away. The larger creature watched her with suspicious eyes. Its body was tense, ready to fight even though fighting would probably kill it. Reached into her pocket and pulled out the food she had found. Half a protein bar, a small container of cold rice. This was supposed to be her dinner, maybe her only food for the next 2 days. She placed the food on the floor and pushed it toward the creatures. The larger one did not move. It did not trust her. But the smaller one, the one that was shaking, lifted its head slightly. Its amber eyes looked at the food, then back at the food. Sat very still. She did not speak. She did not move. She just waited. Finally, the smaller creature crawled forward. Its movements were slow and painful. It reached the protein bar and sniffed it once. Then it began to eat. It ate like something that had not tasted food in many days, desperate and messy. The larger creature watched its sibling eat. Something changed in its eyes. The suspicion did not disappear completely, but something else appeared. Something like confusion, like it could not understand why this human was helping them. After the smaller one finished the protein bar, the larger one finally moved. It ate the rice quickly, then looked at. There was no more food. She had given them everything. Felt her own stomach twist with hunger, but she smiled a little. The smaller creature suddenly collapsed. Its body went limp on the cold floor. It was still breathing, but barely. The larger one made a sound of distress and pressed its body against its sibling, trying to share warmth. Did not think, she just acted. She took off her jacket, the only warm thing she owned, and carefully wrapped it around the smaller creature. The larger one tensed when she got close, but it did not attack. It watched her hands as she tucked the jacket around its sibling, making sure the small body was covered. When she finished, sat back. She was cold now, wearing only a thin shirt, but the smaller creature had stopped shaking so badly. The larger one looked at for a long moment. Then it did something unexpected. It lowered its head slightly, just a little, like a tiny bow. Felt tears in her eyes, but she blinked them away. She whispered to them, her voice soft in the darkness. She told them that she knew what it was like to be hungry. She knew what it was like to be alone. She knew what it was like when nobody in the whole universe seemed to care if you lived or died. She promised them that she would not let anyone hurt them. The creatures could not understand her words, but somehow she felt like they understood her meaning. For a while there was peace in that dark corner of the garbage bay. 3 lost children, 2 of them not even human, sharing a moment of quiet connection. Then the peace shattered. A loud alarm began to sound. Red lights flashed on the walls. A mechanical voice announced that security drones had detected heat signatures in the trash compactor bay. All units were ordered to investigate. His heart began to beat very fast. She looked at the 2 creatures. They were too weak to run. They were too weak to hide. If security found them, they would be captured or killed. She had to make a choice. Stood up and gathered the smaller creature in her arms, jacket and all. It weighed almost nothing. She looked at the larger one and held out her other hand. The creature hesitated for only a second. Then it climbed up her arm and wrapped itself around her shoulders, clinging to her like a frightened child. The security drones were coming, could hear their engines getting closer. She ran through the dark corridors like a ghost. She knew these passages better than anyone. For 3 years, she had survived by learning every hidden path, every forgotten tunnel, every crack in the walls where a small girl could disappear. The security drones were fast, but was faster in the dark places. She squeezed through a gap between 2 broken pipes. She climbed up a ladder that was missing half its rungs. She crawled through a ventilation shaft so narrow that her shoulders scraped both sides. The whole time, she held the smaller creature tight against her chest while the larger one clung to her back. Behind her, she could hear the drones getting confused. They were too big to follow her path. Their sensors could not track her through so much metal and machinery. She was slipping away. After what felt like hours, finally stopped. She was deep in the oldest part of the station, far below the levels where normal people lived. These were the abandoned mining tunnels from when Station Omega 9 was first built. Nobody came here anymore. The air was thin and cold, and the lights had stopped working long ago. Pulled out a small flashlight she always carried. The beam was weak and yellow, but it was enough to see. She found a small alcove and sat down, breathing hard. The smaller creature was still unconscious in her arms. The larger one climbed down from her shoulders and sat beside its sibling, making soft, worried sounds. Did not know what to do next. She could not take care of 2 dying dragon cubs by herself. She had no medicine. She barely had food. If security kept searching, they would eventually find this place too. She needed help. But who would help her? Who would risk everything for 2 alien creatures that the whole station was hunting? There was only one person could think of. She picked up the creatures again and started walking deeper into the tunnels. She walked for nearly an hour, following a path she had memorized years ago. Finally, she reached a heavy metal door hidden behind a pile of old equipment. Knocked in a special pattern. 3 quick knocks, 2 slow knocks, 1 quick knock. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then she heard locks clicking open. The door swung inward, and warm light spilled out into the dark tunnel. An old man stood in the doorway. His name was. He was 65 years old, with white hair and a face full of wrinkles. He had been an engineer on the station for 40 years before he retired. Now he lived alone in this hidden workshop, fixing things that people brought him. Was also the only adult who had ever been kind to. When she was first orphaned, scared and starving, had found her crying in a corridor. He had given her food and taught her how to survive. He showed her the safe places to sleep and the dangerous people to avoid. He never asked for anything in return. Now looked at with concern. Then his eyes moved to the creatures in her arms, and his face turned pale. He knew immediately what they were. For a moment did not move. Could see him thinking, calculating the danger. Hiding these creatures could get him killed. The smart thing would be to close the door and pretend he never saw anything. But was not a man who did the smart thing. He was a man who did the right thing. He stepped aside and let enter. The workshop was warm and cluttered with machinery and tools. Cleared a space on his workbench and helped lay the smaller creature down. The larger one immediately climbed up to stay close to its sibling. Examined the creatures without touching them. His old eyes were sharp despite his age. He saw the wounds, the signs of starvation, the dangerous weakness in the smaller one. He asked where she found them. She told him everything. The garbage bay, the alarm, the run through the tunnels. As she talked, gathered supplies, clean water, nutrient paste that he used for his own meals, bandages. Working together, they cleaned the creature's wounds and tried to get them to drink water. The larger one was suspicious at first, but when it saw that trusted, it relaxed slightly. The smaller one woke up just long enough to drink some water before falling unconscious again. While they worked, told what he knew about He said they were the oldest species in the galaxy. They had been traveling between stars when humans still lived in caves on Earth. Their civilization was built on honor, debt, and memory. They never forgot a kindness, and they never forgot an insult. Their military power was so great that no other species dared to challenge them. But most importantly, said, they loved their children more than anything. Dragon cubs were rare and precious. The death of even one youngling was considered a tragedy that the whole species would mourn. These 2 cubs, alone and hunted on a human station, were probably the children of someone very important. Their mother must have been captured or killed. Someone had been trying to smuggle them, probably to sell their blood on the black market. Dragon blood was worth more than gold or jewels. It could be used to make powerful medicines and weapons. Felt sick when she heard this. Someone had hurt these bobbies for money. She looked at the creatures. She needed to give them names. She could not keep calling them the large one and the small one. She decided to call the larger one, which meant sky. Its scales had tiny blue patterns that reminded her of clouds. The smaller one she named, which meant star, because of the white spots that dotted its silver body. As the hours passed, the cubs slowly began to recover. The warmth of the workshop helped. The food helped more. Finally stopped shivering and fell into a deep, healing sleep. Stayed awake, watching everything, but its body relaxed and its eyes became less fearful. Sat beside them, exhausted but unable to sleep. She kept stroking his head gently. The scales felt smooth and cool under her fingers. Then something strange happened. Moved closer to and pressed its head against her hand. When their skin touched, suddenly saw images in her mind. They were not her own memories. They were the dragon's memories. She saw a beautiful ship with golden walls. She saw a female dragon, large and powerful with scales that shone like the sun. This was their mother. She was holding and in her arms, keeping them safe and warm. Then she saw fire and screaming. Men with weapons attacking the ship. Their mother fighting back, killing many of them, but there were too many. A blast of energy hit her. She fell. The last thing the cubs saw was their mother's body lying still on the floor as rough hands grabbed them and threw them into a dark cage. Pulled her hand back, tears streaming down her face. She understood now. These bobbies had watched their mother die trying to protect them. They had been alone in the dark, starving and scared, waiting for someone to save them. But nobody came except a human orphan girl, with nothing to offer but half a protein bar and a torn jacket. Looked at with those amber eyes, it showed her one more image, a vast fleet of dragon ships, hundreds of them circling a beautiful planet with floating mountains. Home. Then another image appeared, one that confused her. It was herself, standing among the dragons, welcomed and protected. She did not understand what that meant, but she felt something she had not felt in 3 years. Hope. The moment of peace was broken by his voice. He had been monitoring station communications on his old radio equipment. His face was grim as he told what he had heard. The man hunting the dragons was named Commander. He was the head of station security, but he was corrupt. He worked with the criminals who had captured the cubs' mother. He knew the cubs were somewhere in the lower levels, and he was bringing more soldiers to search. They had thermal scanners that could detect body heat through walls. Said they could not stay here. Sooner or later would find this place. They needed to move. But where could they go? The cubs were still too weak to travel far, and there was nowhere on the station that could not reach. Felt despair rising in her chest. She had tried so hard. She had given everything she had, but it was not enough. It was never enough. Then stood up on the workbench. It spread its small wings, still weak and damaged, and made a sound. Not a growl or a cry, something different, something that felt like a promise. The message in its mind was simple but clear. We will not let them take you either. The next 2 days were the most frightening of his life, and that was saying something for a girl who had survived alone on the streets for 3 years. Commander's soldiers tore through the lower levels of the station like a storm. They broke into homes. They dragged people out of their beds for questioning. They arrested anyone who looked suspicious. The peaceful darkness of the forgotten districts was filled with shouting and the harsh light of search beams. Moved and the cubs 3 times, using secret passages that even the station's builders had forgotten. They slept in storage rooms filled with ancient equipment. They hid in spaces between walls. They ate cold food in silence, afraid that any sound might give them away. Through it all and grew stronger. The food and rest were working. Could walk now, though still slowly. Had regained some of its fierce spirit. When soldiers passed close to their hiding spots, the larger cub would position itself between the danger and ready to fight. Found this both touching and sad. Was still just a baby, no matter how brave it tried to be. On the 3rd day, everything changed. Was alone in their current hiding spot, an abandoned water treatment room, while went to gather supplies. The cubs were sleeping, curled together in a nest of old blankets. Was watching the door when she heard footsteps approaching. They were not footsteps, these were lighter, quicker. grabbed a metal pipe from the floor and prepared to fight. The door opened slowly, and a figure slipped inside. It was a girl, about 14 years old, thin and ragged-like. Her name knew her from the streets, was another orphan, but she was different she was harder, colder. She survived by selling information to anyone who would pay. His eyes went straight to the sleeping dragons, and a strange smile crossed her face. She told that she had been following her for 2 days. She knew about the cubs. She knew about help. She knew about every hiding spot they had used. The reward for information about the dragons was enough to buy passage off the station and start a new life somewhere better. His hands tightened on the metal pipe. She asked why she had not reported them already. Did not answer right away. She walked closer, looking at the cubs with curiosity. Woke up and immediately placed itself in front of, growling weakly, but did not seem afraid. She said she had been ready to tell Commander. She had gone to the security office twice, but each time something stopped her. She did not know what. Maybe she was just stupid. Then asked a question. She asked why was doing this. The cubs were just animals, alien animals. They were not worth dying for, could turn them in herself and get the reward. Why was she throwing her life away for creatures that were not even her own species? Lowered the pipe. She looked at and had woken up too and was pressing close to its sibling, both of them staring at with those burning amber eyes. Said that when she found them they were starving and scared. They had watched their mother die. They were alone in a universe that wanted to hurt them. When she looked at them, she did not see aliens or animals. She saw children, children like herself. Was quiet for a long moment. Something in her hard eyes seemed to crack. Before she could respond, burst through the door. His face was white with fear. He said that soldiers had found the entrance to the old mining tunnels. They were coming this way with thermal scanners. They had maybe 10 minutes before they were discovered. Had one last desperate idea. Deep in the tunnels there was an old escape pod from the station's original construction. It had been left there for emergencies and forgotten. It might still work. If they could reach it, they could launch into space and send a distress signal. Maybe someone would help them. It was a terrible plan. The escape pod was probably broken after so many years. Even if it worked, where would they go? There was thousands of light years away, and Commander would certainly try to shoot them down before they got far. But it was the only plan they had. They ran. Came with them, did not ask why. There was no time for questions. The tunnels were dark and winding. Led the way with a flickering flashlight. Carried in her arms while rode on her shoulders. Brought up the rear, watching behind them for pursuers. They could hear the soldiers getting closer. The sounds of boots and equipment echoed through the metal passages. Men were faster than they had expected. After what felt like forever, they reached the escape pod bay. It was a small chamber carved into the rock, and sitting in the center was the pod. It looked ancient. Its hull was covered in dust and corrosion, but when opened the hatch, the interior lights flickered on. There was hope. Began working on the controls, trying to wake up systems that had been sleeping for decades. Placed the cubs inside the pod and strapped them into a seat. Stood guard at the entrance to the chamber, holding some metal pipe. The soldiers were almost there. They could hear Commander's voice now, shouting orders. Then the worst happened. Soldiers burst into the chamber from a side tunnel that nobody had seen. There were 6 of them, armed with weapons that could kill with a single shot. Behind them came Commander himself. He was a tall man with a cruel face and cold eyes. He looked at the scene before him and smiled. He said that had led him on a good chase, but it was over now. He ordered his soldiers to take the dragons alive and kill everyone else. Attacked first. She swung the metal pipe at the nearest soldier, catching him by surprise. He went down, but the others turned their weapons toward her. Threw himself at another soldier, using his old body as a shield. He was not strong enough to win, but he bought precious seconds. stood in front of the escape pod blocking the way to the cubs. She had no weapon. She had no training. She was just a 12-year-old girl in torn clothes. But she did not move. Commander walked toward her slowly. He said she was brave but foolish. He told her the truth about the cubs. Their mother had been one of the highest-ranking females in society. Her blood alone was worth more than entire star systems. The cubs were even more valuable because they were young and pure. He would sell them to the highest bidder. Their blood would be drained slowly over many years to make weapons and drugs, and there was nothing a worthless orphan could do to stop it. Did not cry. She did not beg. She looked Commander in the eyes and told him that he would have to kill her first. Shrugged, he raised his weapon. Then did something unexpected. The young dragon jumped out of the escape pod and placed itself between end. It spread its small wings wide, making itself as big as possible. It was shaking with fear and weakness, but it stood firm. It was ready to die for the human girl who had shared her last meal with two starving strangers. Laughed, he said it was touching. He would kill them both together. But before he could fire, let out a sound. It was not a roar. It was not a cry. It was something deeper, something that seemed to vibrate through the walls and floor and air itself. The sound was so strange that everyone stopped moving. Even Commander froze. The sound grew louder, rising in pitch until it hurt to hear. Then it changed into something else entirely. A pulse of energy exploded outward from the small dragon, passing through metal and rock like they were not there. Had sent a call, a beacon that traveled not through normal space but through something older and stranger, a call that only the could hear. A call for help. Collapsed, exhausted by the effort, rushed to its sibling's side. The pulse of energy faded away. Commander recovered quickly. He said that whatever that was, it did not matter. Help was too far away to save them. He pointed his weapon at again. Every screen in the chamber suddenly went dark. Every light shut off. For a moment there was complete blackness and silence. Then a sound came through the station's communication system. A voice speaking words in a language that no human had ever learned. A language older than human civilization itself. The lights came back on. On every screen a single message appeared, translated into human words. The message was simple. "We are coming. Touch the children and burn." Commander's face went white as snow. They had heard the call. The next hour was the longest of his life. Commander did not kill her. He was too scared. Instead, he grabbed her and the cubs and dragged them back to the main level of the station. His soldiers followed, their faces pale with fear. Everyone had heard the message. Everyone knew what was coming. The whole station was in chaos. People ran through the corridors, screaming and crying. Alarms rang constantly. On every screen, station authorities told people to stay calm, but nobody was calm. The most powerful species in the galaxy had just announced they were coming, and everyone knew they did not make empty threats. Took and the cubs to the station's command center. Through the large windows, she could see the stars outside. They looked peaceful and quiet, but she knew that peace would not last. Contacted his bosses, the criminals who had hired him to capture the cubs. They told him to use the children as hostages. They would not attack if there was a risk of killing the younglings. This would give them time to negotiate. Held and close to her chest. Both cubs were weak and exhausted, but they pressed against her, seeking comfort. She whispered to them that everything would be okay. She did not know if that was true, but she wanted them to feel less scared. And had been captured too. They were being held in a corner of the command center by armed guards. Looked tired but determined. Looked angry. She had fought hard before being restrained. Then the fleet arrived. There was no warning. One moment the space outside the windows was empty. The next moment it was full of ships. Had never seen anything so terrifying or so beautiful. The warships did not look like human ships. They were shaped like dragons, with long bodies and massive wings made of metal and energy. Their hulls were covered in scales that shimmered with colors that did not have words for. Each ship had eyes at the front, glowing with inner fire, and they all seemed to be looking directly at Station Omega 9. There were hundreds of them, maybe thousands. The largest ships were bigger than the station itself. The smallest were still larger than anything humanity had ever built. The station's defense systems activated automatically, bringing weapons online. But compared to the fleet outside, those weapons looked like toys. Commander opened communication with the fleet. His voice was shaking, but he tried to sound brave. He told them that he had the younglings. If the fleet attacked, the cubs would die. He demanded safe passage out of the system in exchange for returning them. There was a long silence. Then a voice responded. It was a female voice, deep and ancient, speaking human words slowly as if the language was beneath her. The voice said that she was Grand Matriarch, Supreme Ruler of the, Mother of the Eternal Flame, Guardian of the Last Light. The cubs that held were her, the offspring of her only daughter, who had been murdered by his criminal masters. She did not negotiate with murderers and thieves. She demanded one thing: bring her the human child who had protected her, bring her the one called. Was confused. Why did the Dragon Queen want a worthless orphan girl? But he did not argue. He ordered his soldiers to prepare for transport. Was terrified. She did not want to leave and she did not want to go to the dragon ships, but she also understood that she had no choice. If she refused, the dragons might destroy the entire station. Thousands of innocent people would die. She looked at Anne, gave her a small nod of encouragement, looked like she wanted to say something, but the words would not come. Gently handed the cubs to, she told them to be brave. She told them she would see them again. She did not know if that was true. Then she walked toward the transport shuttle that would take her to the dragon fleet. The flight across the empty space between the station and the flagship was short but felt like forever. Sat alone in the small shuttle, looking out the window at the massive dragon ships all around her. Up close, they were even more impressive. She could see patterns in the metal scales, ancient symbols that seemed to move and change as she watched. The shuttle entered the flagship through an opening in its side, like a small fish swimming into the mouth of a whale. Inside, the ship was nothing like expected. She had imagined cold metal and harsh lights like human ships. Instead, the interior was warm and alive. The walls glowed with soft bioluminescent light in colors of blue and gold. The air smelled clean and fresh, like a garden after rain. Strange plants grew in alcoves along the corridors, and small creatures that looked like tiny dragons flew through the air. Dragon guards met her at the shuttle. They were enormous, each one bigger than an elephant, with scales that ranged from deep red to brilliant gold. They surrounded her but did not touch her. They did not need to. There was nowhere for her to run. They led her through corridors and chambers, each more beautiful than the last. Saw dragons of all sizes going about their business. Some were as small as cats, others as large as buildings. They all stopped to look at her as she passed. She felt their eyes on her, curious and questioning. Finally, they reached the throne room. It was a vast chamber with a ceiling so high that could not see the top. The walls were covered in carvings that told stories she could not understand. In the center of the room, raised on a platform of crystal, was the throne. And on the throne sat Grand Matriarch. Stopped breathing. Was the largest dragon she had ever seen, larger than anything she had imagined. Her body was covered in scales that shifted through every color, never staying the same from one moment to the next. Her eyes were like twin suns, ancient and powerful beyond measure. When she looked at, the girl felt like every secret in her soul was being read. Behind stood other dragons, including one that radiated danger like heat from a fire. This was War Commander, leader of the military, known across the galaxy as the Destroyer of Worlds. His scales were the color of dried blood, and his eyes burned with barely controlled violence. Wanted to run. She wanted to hide, but she forced her legs to move forward until she stood at the base of the platform. Spoke, her voice filled the entire chamber without being loud. She said that her daughter, the mother of and had been the last of her direct bloodline. When she was murdered by traffickers, the future of the ruling family died with her. The cubs were the only hope remaining. For days had searched for them. She had feared they were dead. Then she heard call, a desperate cry for help that crossed the stars. And in that call, she saw something unexpected. She saw memories from her minds. She saw a human child, starving and alone herself, giving away her only food to two creatures she had never met. She saw that same child wrapping her only jacket around a dying cub. She saw her standing against armed soldiers, ready to die rather than let the cubs be taken. Had lived for 10,000 years. In all that time, no creature outside that had ever shown true mercy to a dragon child without expecting something in return. Humans, especially, were known to the dragons as selfish and short-lived creatures, concerned only with their own survival. But this child was different. Leaned down, lowering her massive head until her eye was level with. Up close, that eye was bigger than its entire body. She could see galaxies swirling in its depths. Asked one question: why did she do it? Why did she risk everything for strangers who were not even her own species? His voice shook when she answered. She said that when she saw them, she did not see aliens. She saw two scared, hungry children who needed help. She knew what it felt like to be alone and afraid. She could not walk away from that, no matter what they were. Was silent for a long moment. Then something extraordinary happened. The ancient dragon queen lowered her head even further, until her snout touched the floor at its feet. It was a bow. Gasps echoed through the throne room. War Commander stepped forward in shock. This had not happened in 3,000 years. Raised her head and spoke words that would change history. She said that for saving the heirs of the eternal flame, a debt was owed, and among a debt to the heirs was a debt to the throne itself. There was only one answer that honor would accept. What happened next would be remembered for thousands of years. Grand Matriarch rose from her throne and descended the crystal steps. Every dragon in the chamber fell silent. Even War Commander, the most feared warrior in the galaxy, stepped back with respect. Circled around slowly. The ancient dragon's movements were graceful despite her enormous size. Her scales threw patterns of colored light across the walls. She spoke in a voice that carried to every corner of the room. She declared that by the ancient laws of a life debt to the royal bloodline was the most sacred bond that could exist. It had been 3,000 years since such a debt was owed. The last time, it had been owed to a warrior who saved an infant prince from assassins. Now, for the first time in all of history, this debt was owed to a human. Commanded the ceremony to begin. Dragon attendants brought forward a bowl made of pure crystal. Inside the bowl was a liquid that glowed like captured starlight. This was the water of binding, used only in the most important rituals of the people. Dipped one massive claw into the liquid. Then, with surprising gentleness, she touched that claw to his forehead. The liquid felt cold at first, then warm. Felt something spreading through her body, like light filling her veins. She could suddenly sense the dragons around her in a way she never could before. She could feel their emotions, their thoughts, their ancient and powerful minds. Then came the oath. War Commander stepped forward. The blood-red dragon walked until he stood before. He was so large that she had to lean back to see his face. His eyes, which had terrified her minutes ago, now held something different. Respect, and something like wonder. Lowered himself to the ground. His belly touched the floor. His head bowed until his snout was at his feet. The most feared military commander in the galaxy knelt before a 12-year-old orphan girl. His voice rumbled like distant thunder as he spoke the ancient words. He swore that by the laws of his ancestors, a life debt to the heirs was a life debt to the throne. Where commanded, he would follow. Her enemies were his enemies. Her cause was his cause. He swore this oath to remain unbroken until the stars grew cold and the universe fell silent. One by one, every dragon in the throne room came forward. Warriors with scales and fierce eyes, scholars with gentle faces and wise gazes, elders who had lived for thousands of years, young dragons who had never seen battle, they all knelt before, they all spoke the same oath. The entire military might have swore loyalty to a human child who had nothing but a kind heart. Stood frozen through all of it. Tears ran down her face, but she did not wipe them away. She could not believe this was happening. Part of her wondered if she was dreaming, if she had actually died in that garbage bay and this was some kind of afterlife. But the cold floor under her feet was real. The glowing liquid on her forehead was real. The dragons surrounding her, pledging their lives to hers, were real. When the ceremony ended, approached again. The Dragon Queen's voice was softer now, almost kind. She said that had asked for nothing when she helped the cubs. She expected no reward, no rescue, no payment. She had given everything she had simply because she could not bear to see children suffer. Because of this, said, would receive everything. A home on the world of, education from the finest teachers in the galaxy, protection from anyone who would ever try to harm her, and most importantly, the love and companionship of and who would grow up at her side. Finally found her voice. She tried to refuse. She said she was nobody, just an orphan from a garbage district. She had no kingdom, no army, no great cause. She did not deserve any of this. Made a sound that might have been a laugh. She said that was exactly why deserved it, because she did not seek power or glory, because she thought of others before herself, because she saw two starving creatures and gave them her last meal without hesitation. That kind of heart was rarer than gold, rarer than dragon blood, rarer than anything in the universe. Before could argue more, a door opened at the side of the throne room. Through it came two familiar shapes, running as fast as their small legs could carry them, and threw themselves at, nearly knocking her over. They climbed up her body and wrapped themselves around her, making sounds of pure joy. Their minds touched hers through the new bond the ceremony had created, and she felt their love like warm sunlight. She was their human now. They were her dragons. Nothing would ever separate them again. Over the following weeks, many things changed. The criminal organization that had captured the cub's mother was destroyed. Warships hunted down every member, every ship, every hidden base. Commander was captured and handed over to Dragon Justice, which was swift and permanent. Station Omega-9 was transformed, was given authority over a new program to help orphan children. Never again would young ones have to survive alone in the garbage districts. Became his first assistant, her hard exterior slowly softening as she found purpose in helping others. And humanity, once considered weak and unimportant by the greater galaxy, suddenly found itself in a new position. One of their own had earned the loyalty of the most powerful species known to exist. Other civilizations began to look at humans differently. Perhaps these short-lived, soft-bodied creatures were more than they appeared. Months later, sat on a balcony of her new home on. The dragon world was more beautiful than anything she had imagined. Mountains floated in the sky, held up by ancient magic or technology she did not understand. Crystal seas reflected 3 moons. Cities of living stone stretched across valleys of impossible colors. And lay beside her, no longer small and starving. They were growing quickly, already the size of large dogs. Their scales gleamed with health, silver and shimmering. They played games with each other, chasing and tumbling, filling the evening air with happy sounds. Watched them with a smile. She still could not quite believe her life had changed so much. Sometimes she woke up in her soft bed and expected to find herself back in a ventilation shaft, cold and hungry. Then she would feel a warm body pressed against her side and gentle thoughts in her mind, and she would remember that it was real. A servant approached the balcony. The servant was a young dragon, smaller than with scales of deep green. It bowed respectfully and told that emissaries from the Galactic Council had arrived. They wanted to discuss humanity's new status in the galaxy. They were requesting an audience. Thought about it for a moment. The Galactic Council was made up of representatives from the most powerful civilizations in known space. Before, they would never have bothered speaking to a human, let alone a child. Now, they had traveled across the stars to seek her attention. She told the servant to inform the emissaries that she would see them tomorrow. Tonight, she had promised, and that she would tell them a story. The servant bowed and left to deliver the message. Settled back in her chair, climbed into her lap while curled around her shoulders. Both cubs looked at her with bright, expectant eyes. She asked them what story they wanted to hear. Sent her a mental image, their first meeting in the garbage bay, the moment she had shared her food with two starving strangers. Added another image, the three of them together flying through the stars. Laughed softly. She began to speak, her voice gentle in the evening air. She told them about a girl who had nothing. A girl who lived in the dark and ate garbage and thought nobody in the universe cared if she lived or died. A girl who found two lost creatures and gave them everything she had, not because she expected a reward, but because it was the right thing to do. She told them that kindness was never wasted, even when it seemed foolish. That love given freely always found its way back, that the smallest person could change the universe simply by choosing to care. And listened with their bodies and their minds, absorbing every word. Their contentment flowed through the bond they shared with, warm and steady like a heartbeat. Below the balcony, dragon warriors patrolled the skis, keeping watch over their new lady. The three moons rose higher, painting the floating mountains in silver light. Somewhere in the distance, a dragon song echoed across the valley, beautiful and wild. Finished her story. The cubs were already half asleep, lulled by her voice and the peace of the evening. She looked out at the incredible world that was now her home. She thought about the frightened girl she had been, hiding in ventilation shafts and fighting for scraps of food. She thought about all the times she had felt worthless and alone. She was not alone anymore. She had a family now. She had a purpose. She had the loyalty of dragons and a place among the stars. And it had all started with half a protein bar and a torn jacket, given to two hungry strangers in the dark. Closed her eyes and held her dragons close. The universe was vast and full of wonders, and somehow, against all odds, an orphan girl from the garbage district had found her place in it. She smiled and let herself rest. Tomorrow, she would face emissaries and politics and the complicated business of being important. But tonight, she was just surrounded by those who loved her, watching the moons rise over a world she never dreamed she would see. It was more than enough. It was everything.